Good evening, everyone. Today we are continuing with our animation process, our attempt of animating. So yeah, let's do this. Where were we the last time? Let me see. Oh yeah, we had the yeah. So we have what, 6. Let me just duplicate it towards the 7 for now. But let's do this. So needed to do some switching here, I think. Just let me see. Yeah. Right. Just put my drawing tablet on. Yep. Let's see. So need to move this leg over there. Okay. So I'm gonna take this, cut it off like this. Move it on the right side. Clean it a little bit for now. Oh, by the way, we didn't even touch the tail, so we also have to do the tail later on. But first, we're gonna play with this thing over here. So we need to move this leg a little bit in the perspective. This also let's lower it just a little bit, and it like here, maybe. Let me see. No, even more here. Just a little bit to the left. Yeah, I think this is good for now. Okay. So this entire area will be shaded because that's the like in the background. Okay. I also need to change this part now. Okay. So we have like a different shade here. I will try to fix now. This. It's okay. And let's bring this foot back. Just switch the perspective a little bit, like this. See? Yeah, this should be fine, I guess. Oh, also, let's cut a little bit for now, and I'm gonna draw it later on. Because I just want to find the position of the... Yeah, this is actually fine. Check again. Okay. We also need this part. Damn it. Damn it, damn it. So I'm just doing things rough at this moment. See? Yep. Expand this a little bit. This side. So what I'm doing now is trying to work in between animation. We have a few more frames for a walk cycle. Maybe I should raise this even a little bit more. Of course, why not? Yeah, this is okay-ish. Also, okay. So we have like a big thingy over here, a little thingy over here, and also a little starlight shadow over here. See? Oh. Oh. It's a little off. Also, I need to correct a little bit here. Just a little bit. I need to increase this knee pads just a little bit, you know, because here they are becoming really large, and here I will also reduce them a little bit, definitely. So I'm just gonna make them smaller for now. it's a bit off. But I want to do rough walk cycle so I can later on I can correct stuff, you know. Okay. So now we are on we are halfway there. So oh, kind of want to move this hand on the outside just a little bit. Let me see. Everything is smooth up until this part. So let's move it just a little bit. You know. See. Damn it. Again. Again. Like this maybe, let me see. It's still like a large movement. So I'm gonna rotate it a little more. Just see. Yeah, I guess it's okay-ish now. There's gonna be corrections, a lot of corrections later on, but we just try to figure out that basic movement, and then we can, when we set up everything else, we can do corrections. Whoa. Okay. Okay, let's correct this part. Oh, since there is nobody in the chat, we can listen to that Mass Effect audiobook until somebody comes and interacts.
Unaware, they didn't even realize their original creators had vanished 50,000 years ago. Anderson ignored the keeper as he went by. A typical reaction. They were so ubiquitous on the station, and so unobtrusive and unassuming, that most people tended to just take them for granted. 5 minutes later he had reached the building that served as the human embassy. He went inside, the corners of his mouth rising up in a slight grin when he saw the attractive young woman sitting behind the reception desk. She looked up as he approached, returning his coy smile with a radiant one of her own. Good morning, Aurora. It's been a while since I've seen you around here, Lieutenant. Her voice was as pleasing to the ear as her appearance was to the eye, warm, inviting, confident, the perfect welcome to any and all embassy visitors. I was beginning to think you were avoiding me, she teased. No, I'm just trying to stay out of trouble. With a free hand, she tapped a few keys on her terminal and glanced over at the screen. Uh-oh, she said, feigning a deep and troubling concern. You've got a meeting with Ambassador Goyle herself. She arched an eyebrow, playfully taking him to task. I thought you said you were staying out of trouble. I said I was trying to stay out of trouble, he countered. I never said I was succeeding. He was rewarded with a light laugh that was probably polished and practiced, but nonetheless sounded warm and sincere. The captain's already here. I'll let them know you're coming. Anderson nodded and headed up the stairs toward the ambassador's office, his step somewhat lighter than it had been a few moments before. He wasn't foolish enough to read anything into their exchange. Aurora was just doing her job. The receptionist had been hired for her ability to make people feel comfortable and at ease, but he wouldn't deny that he enjoyed their flirtations. The door to the ambassador's office was closed. Aurora had said they were expecting him, but he still paused to knock. "Come in," came a woman's voice from the other side. As soon as he entered, he knew the meeting was serious. There were several comfortable chairs and a small coffee table in the office, not to mention the ambassador's desk. But both the captain and the ambassador were standing as they waited for him. "Please close the door behind you, Lieutenant." Anderson did as the ambassador instructed, then stepped into the room and stood stiffly at attention. Anita Goyle was the most influential and important individual in human politics, and she definitely projected an image of power. Bold and confident, she was a striking woman in her early 60s. She was of medium build, with long silver hair, tied up in a stylish bun, and high, elegant cheekbones. Her features were Middle Eastern, though she had deep emerald eyes that stood out in sharp contrast to her mocha skin. Right now, those eyes were fixed directly on Anderson, and he had to fight the urge to fidget under their piercing gaze. "At ease," his captain said. Anderson complied, widening his stance and clasping his hands behind his back. "I'm not going to play games with you, Lieutenant," the ambassador began. She had a reputation for cutting through the usual political BS. That was one of the things Anderson admired about her. "We're here to try and figure out what went wrong at Sidon, and how we're going to fix it." "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "I want you to speak freely here. You understand, Lieutenant? Don't hold anything back." "Understood, ma'am." "As you know, Sidon was one of our top security clearance installations. What you hopefully don't know was that it was the primary Alliance facility for AI research." It was difficult for Anderson not to show his surprise. Attempting to develop artificial intelligence was one of the few things specifically banned in the Citadel Conventions. Developing purely synthetic life, whether cloned or manufactured, was considered a crime against the entire galaxy. Experts from nearly every species predicted that true artificial intelligence, such as a synthetic neural network with the ability to absorb and critically analyze knowledge, would grow exponentially the instant it learned to learn. It would teach itself, quickly surpassing the capabilities of its organic creators and growing beyond their control. Every single species in the galaxy relied on computers that were linked into the vast data network of the extranet for transport, trade, defense, and basic survival. If a rogue AI program was somehow able to access and influence those data networks, the results would be catastrophic. Conventional theory held that the doomsday scenario wasn't merely possible, it was unavoidable. According to the Council, the emergence of an artificial intelligence was the single greatest threat to organic life in the galaxy, and there was evidence to support their position. 300 years ago, long before humanity appeared on the galactic scene, the Quarian species had created a race of synthetic servants to serve as an expandable and expendable labor force. The Geth, as they were called, were not true AIs. Their neural networks were developed in a way that was highly restrictive and self-limiting. Despite this precaution, the Geth eventually turned on their Quarian masters, validating all the dire warnings and predictions. The Quarians had neither the numbers nor the ability to stand against their former servants. In a short but savage war, their entire society was wiped out. Only a few million survivors, less than 1% of their entire population, escaped the genocide, fleeing their home world in a massive fleet, refugees forced to live in exile. In the aftermath of the war, the Geth became a completely isolationist society. Cutting off all contact with the organic species of the galaxy, they expanded their territory into the unexplored regions behind a vast nebulae cloud known as the Perseus Veil. Every attempt to open diplomatic channels with them failed. Emissary vessels sent to open negotiations were attacked and destroyed the moment they entered Geth space. Fleets from every species in Citadel space massed on the borders of the Veil as the Council prepared for a massive Geth invasion. But the expected attack never came. Gradually the fleets were scaled back, until now, several centuries after the Quarians were driven out, only a few patrols remained to monitor the region for signs of Geth aggression. However, the lesson of the Quarians had not been forgotten. They had lost everything to the synthetic creatures they created, and on top of this, the Geth were still less advanced than a true AI. "You look like you have something to say, Lieutenant." Anderson had done his best to keep his face from betraying his feelings, but the ambassador had seen right through his facade. There was a reason she was the most powerful politician in the Alliance. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm just surprised we're conducting AI research. Seems pretty risky." "We are well aware of the dangers," the ambassador reassured him. "We have no intention of unleashing a fully formed AI on the galaxy. The goals of the project were very specific. Create limited AI simulations for observation and study. Humanity is the underdog now," she continued. "We're expanding, but we still don't have the numbers or the fleets to match the major species vying for power in Council space. We need some kind of advantage. Understanding AI technology would help give us the edge we need to compete and survive." "You of all people should understand," the captain added. "Without rudimentary AI technology, we'd all be living under Turian rule right now." It was true. Alliance military strategy relied heavily on highly advanced combat simulation programs. Collating millions of variables each second, the simulations would analyze a massive databank of scenarios, helping to provide constant updates on optimized tactics and strategies to the commanders of each Alliance vessel. Without the combat simulators, humanity wouldn't have stood a chance against the larger, more experienced Turian fleets in the First Contact War. "I understand your concern," Ambassador Goyle explained, possibly sensing Anderson still wasn't wholly convinced. "But Sidon Base was operating under the strictest security and safety protocols. The project head, Dr. Shu Qian, is the galaxy's foremost expert on artificial intelligence research. He personally oversaw every aspect of the project. Qian even insisted that the neural networks we used to create the AI simulations be completely self-contained. The data had to be registered and recorded by hand, then manually entered into a separate system to ensure there was no chance of cross-contamination with the neural network. Whatever happened, there was no way for the AI simulations to affect anything outside the restricted data systems within the base. Every possible precaution was taken to make sure nothing could possibly go wrong. And yet something did. "You're out of line, Lieutenant," the captain barked. The ambassador held up her hand as she jumped to his defense. "I told him to speak freely, Captain." "I meant no disrespect, ma'am," Anderson said by way of apology. "You don't need to justify Sidon's existence to me. I'm just a grunt who got sent in to clean up the mess." An awkward silence followed, finally broken by the ambassador. "I've read your report," she said, tactfully changing the direction of the conversation. "You don't seem to think this was a random attack." "No, ma'am. I'd say Sidon was specifically targeted. I just didn't know why until now." "If that's true, there's a good chance whoever attacked Sidon was also after Dr. Kian specifically. His work in the field is unparalleled. Nobody understands synthetic intelligence better than he." "You think Dr. Kian's still alive?" "My gut says he is," the ambassador answered. "I think whoever attacked Sidon destroyed the base to cover their tracks. They wanted us to think everybody inside was dead, so we wouldn't bother looking for Kian." The lieutenant had assumed the explosion was meant to hide the identity of the traitor, but it could also have been used to hide the fact that Kian wasn't among the dead. There wasn't any way to prove the theory, of course, but like the ambassador, Anderson had learned to trust his gut. And his gut said she was right. "Do you think Dr. Kian could be convinced to use his research to help someone outside the Alliance develop an AI?" he asked. "Dr. Kian isn't a soldier," she replied, a look of grim concern on her face. "He has a brilliant mind, but it's in the body of a frail old man. He might be brave enough to refuse to help a non-human species, even if they threatened to kill him. But a few weeks of torture would break his resistance." "So we're working against the clock." "Seems that way," the ambassador admitted. "I noticed something else in your report," she continued, smoothly changing her focus yet again. "You said you believed the attackers had help from someone working on the project?" "Yes, ma'am." "We may know who that person is," the captain chimed in. "Sir?" It was the ambassador who answered him. "One of our top technicians left the base UA just hours before the attack. Kali Sanders. We have reports she was last seen on Elysium, but she's dropped off the grid since then." "You figure if we find her, we find Dr. Kian?" "We won't know that until you find her, Lieutenant." Anderson was surprised. "You're sending the Hastings to track her down?" "No," the ambassador replied. "Just you." Instinctively he turned toward his captain. "Sir, I don't understand." "You're the best damned XO I've ever served with, Anderson," the captain said. "But the ambassador's asking that you be reassigned." "Understood, sir." He tried to keep his voice professional, but Goyle must have picked up on his disappointment. "This isn't a punishment, Lieutenant. I've looked over your service records. Head of your class at Arcturus. 3 different medals of merit during the First Contact War. Numerous commendations throughout your career. You're the best the Alliance has to offer. And this is the most important mission we've ever had." Anderson gave an emphatic nod. "You can count on me, Ambassador." He was a soldier, sworn to defend humanity. This was his duty, and it was an honor to accept the burden being placed upon him. "You're going to be working on this alone," the captain told him. "The more people we send after Sanders, the more chance somebody outside this room finds out what we were doing at Sidon." "Officially, this mission doesn't even exist," the ambassador added. "Humanity's still the new kid on the block. We're bold, we're brash, and every other race is just waiting for us to screw up. I don't have to tell you what it's like out there in the Verge, Lieutenant. You've seen how hard it is to establish a colony and make it stick. We're clawing and scraping and fighting for every little gain we make, just trying to survive. But if the Citadel gets wind of this, things will get a whole lot tougher. If we're lucky, we'll get off with an official rebuke and major trade sanctions crippling our economy. If we're unlucky, they could revoke our embassy here on the Citadel. They could make it illegal for any other Council species to deal with us on any level. Humanity's not strong enough to make it out there completely on our own. Not yet." "I know how to be discreet," Anderson assured her. "It's not just you. Kali Sanders knows something about this. So does whoever was involved in the actual attack. How long until one of these people runs across a specter?" Anderson frowned. The last thing they needed was for a Spectre to become involved. Elite agents of the Citadel's covert Special Tactics and Recon branch, Spectres answered directly to the Council itself. Highly trained individuals authorized to act above and outside the law, the Spectres had one simple mandate: protect galactic stability at any and all costs. The Skyllian Verge, a largely unsettled border region of Council space that was a known haven for rebels, insurrectionists, and terrorist groups, was exactly the kind of place where Spectres would be most active. And a rogue faction in possession of the galaxy's foremost expert on AI technology was exactly the kind of threat Spectres excelled in hunting down and eliminating. If a Spectre somehow finds out about this, they'll have to report it to the Council, Anderson said, choosing his words carefully. How far am I supposed to go to keep this secret? Are you asking if we're ordering you to kill an official agent of the Council? The captain asked. Anderson nodded. I can't make that decision for you, Lieutenant, the ambassador told him. We trust your judgment. If the situation comes up, it'll be your call. Not that I think it'll matter, she added ominously. By the time you find out a Spectre's gotten involved, you'll probably already be dead. Chapter 9. Night was approaching on the planet of Jushi. The dim orange sun was setting on the horizon, and Yando, the smaller of the world's two moons, was already approaching its zenith. For the next 20 minutes darkness would reign. Then Budmai, Yando's larger twin, would begin to rise, and the darkness would give way to an eerie twilight. Saren Arterius, a Turian Spectre, waited patiently for the sun to disappear. For several hours Saren had been perched atop a rock outcropping, staking out a small, isolated warehouse in the desert on the outskirts of Fend, Jushi's capital city. Built in the sheltering stones of a small canyon, the run-down building was completely unremarkable, except for the fact that an illegal weapons deal was about to go down there. The buyers were already inside, a group of gun-toting thugs with basic military training known as the Grim Skulls, one of the many private security organizations active in the Verge. The Skulls were small, a few dozen criminal mercenaries who had never been worth Saren's attention before tonight. Then they'd made the mistake of thinking they could purchase a stolen shipment of military-grade weapons that had disappeared from a Turian transport freighter. His ears caught the sound of an engine in the distance, and a few minutes later a 6-wheeled ATV rolled up and came to a stop beside the shed. A half-dozen men got out. 2 were Turian, the others human. Even in the dim light, Saren recognized one of the Turians immediately, a dock worker from the Kamala ports. He'd been following the dock worker for days, ever since he checked the duty logs to see who was on shift when the shipment went missing. Only one worker hadn't shown up for work the next day. Figuring out who the thief was had been embarrassingly easy. Tracking him down wasn't much harder. This entire operation reeked of amateurs in over their heads, from the theft to the buyers. Normally, Saren would have turned the matter over to local authorities and moved on to something bigger. But Turians selling weapons to humans was something he took personally. The door to the shed opened, and 4 of the figures, including both Turians, unloaded a crate from the back of the ATV and carried it inside. The other 2 took up sentry positions beside the door. Saren shook his head in disbelief as he snapped his night vision goggles into place. What possible use was there in leaving 2 men to stand guard outside a warehouse in the middle of nowhere? They had no cover. They were completely exposed. Raising his Izali Combine-manufactured sniper rifle to his eye, he fired 2 shots, and both sentries slumped to the ground. Moving with an almost casual efficiency, he collapsed the sniper rifle and slid it back into the designated slot on his backpack. A more professional operation would have someone on the inside periodically checking on the sentries, or wouldn't have left them out there in the first place. It took him 10 minutes to clamber down from his perch on the rock face. By then the twin moons were both visible, giving enough illumination for him to stash his goggles back into his pack. Whipping out the Holliet Arms semi-automatic assault rifle from where it clicked into place on his thigh, he approached the building's entrance. He'd scouted the warehouse earlier. He knew there were no windows and no other doors. Everyone inside was trapped. Further proof he was dealing with idiots. He pressed himself against the door, listening carefully. Inside he could hear angry bickering. Apparently nobody had the foresight to spell out the terms of the exchange before the meeting. Either that or somebody was trying to renegotiate the deal. Professionals didn't make that mistake. Get to the meeting, make the exchange, and get out. The longer you're there, the more chance something's going to go wrong. Saren pulled 3 incendiary grenades from his belt, primed them, and began to count silently to himself. When he reached 5, he yanked open the door, tossed all 3 grenades in, slammed the door shut, and ran for cover behind the ATV. The explosion blew the door off its hinges, sending smoke, flame, and debris shooting out the opening. Inside he heard screams and the sound of gunfire as the terrified men inside panicked. Burned and blinded, they started shooting wildly, each side convinced they'd been betrayed by the other. For a full 20 seconds, the echo of gunfire reverberating off the warehouse's metal walls drowned out every other sound. Then everything went still. Saren aimed his weapon at the door, and was rewarded a few seconds later when 2 men came charging out, guns blazing. He took the first square in the chest with a short burst from his assault rifle, then ducked behind the tail end of the ATV for cover as the surviving Merc returned fire. A quick roll brought Saren to the front of the vehicle, and when he popped up, his enemy still had his weapon aimed at the back end, waiting for Saren to re-emerge. At point-blank range, the rounds from Saren's assault rifle sheared off half of the guy's head. For good measure, Saren lobbed 2 more grenades into the open door. Instead of a fiery explosion, these released a noxious cloud when they detonated. He heard more shouts and screams, followed by choking coughs. 3 more mercs stumbled out of the shed one by one, each blind and gagging from the poison gas. Not one of them even returned fire as Saren mowed them down. He waited a few more minutes, letting the deadly fog clear, then sprinted from his position behind the truck to the edge of the door. He poked his head inside for an instant, then ducked back out of the way. The warehouse was littered with a dozen bodies. Some had been shot, several were burned, and the rest were twisted into horrific contortions from the gas causing their muscles to seize and spasm as they died. Several weapons were scattered about, dropped by their owners in their death throes. The crate they had carried inside on their arrival sat in the middle of the floor, unopened. Aside from that, the warehouse was empty. Assault rifle in hand, Saren made his way from body to body, slowly working his way from the door toward the back of the warehouse as he checked for signs of life. With the toe of his shoe, he rolled over a charred Turian who had fallen near the crate. One half of his face was burned, the carapace crispy and brittle. The flesh beneath it had melted, fusing the eyelids on the left side together. A small moan escaped his lips, and his good eye fluttered open. "Who are you?" he croaked. "A specter," Saren replied, standing over him. He coughed, spewing up dark phlegm that was mostly a mix of blood and poison. "Please, help me." "You are in violation of interstellar law," Saren recited in a cold, passionless voice. "You are a thief, a smuggler, and a traitor to our species." The dying man tried to say something, but only coughed again. His breath was labored. The acrid smoke from the incendiary grenades had seared his lungs, damaging them so badly he hadn't been able to breathe in enough of the poison gas to kill him. If he received immediate medical attention, there was still a small chance he might survive. But Saren had no intention of taking him to a hospital. Snapping his assault rifle back into the slot on his thigh, Saren dropped down on one knee and leaned in close to the other Turian's flame-ravaged features. "You steal weapons from your own people, and then you sell them to humans?" he demanded in a fierce whisper. Do you know how many Turians I saw die by human hands? It took a tremendous effort, but somehow the burned man managed to mutter 4 faint words in feeble protest through his scorched lips. That war is over. Saren stood up and pulled his pistol in one smooth motion. Tell that to our dead brothers. He fired 2 shots into the Turian's head, ending the conversation. Pistol still in hand, he resumed his inspection of the bodies. He noticed 2 human corpses near the back wall of the warehouse, noticeably less gruesome than the others. The grenades had detonated up near the front of the building, and these mercs had taken less damage. Even the poison would have dissipated by the time it reached all the way back here, explaining why the bodies weren't twisted and contorted like the others. They must have been killed by friendly fire. He approached the first one carefully, then relaxed when he saw clear evidence that the man was truly dead. 6 finger-sized holes in a tight pattern showed where the close-range blast of a scattergun had torn through the front of his protective vest, creating a single fist-sized hole as the rounds exited his back. The final corpse had fallen face down in a pool of his own blood. The scattergun that must have inadvertently killed the man beside him lay on the ground, a hair's breadth away from the body's limp, lifeless hand. Saren froze, suddenly wary. Something wasn't right. His eyes scanned the motionless figure, seeking out the lethal wound. There was a gaping hole in the side of his upper thigh, the likely source of all the blood, but because of how he'd landed, no other injuries were visible. His eyes snapped back to the thigh. Blood still should have been dripping from the wound, but the flow was staunched, as if someone had sealed it with a quick application of Medigel. "Move your hand away from your weapon and roll over," Saren called out, raising his pistol and holding it in both hands as he aimed at the corpse. "Or I'll shoot you right now." After a second, the hand slowly drew back from the scattergun. The man rolled onto his back, gasping loudly for air. He'd been holding his breath as Saren approached, trying to play dead. "Please, don't kill me," he begged as Saren took a step toward him, the pistol trained on the spot right between his eyes. "I didn't even fight in the First Contact War." "Some specters arrest people," Saren said, his tone casual. "I don't." "Wait!" the man screamed, scrambling back until he was pressed up against the wall. "Wait! I have information!" Saren didn't say anything. Instead, he lowered the gun and gave a short nod. "It's another group of mercs, the Blue Suns." Every specter working in the Verge knew the Blue Suns were a force to be reckoned with. A small but well-known group, their members were both experienced and professional, the exact opposite of this crew. "Go on." "They're up to something big." "What?" I don't know," the man stammered, wincing as if he expected to be shot for the admission. After the second it took him to realize he was still alive, he plowed forward, speaking quickly. "That's how we got in on this buy. The Blue Suns were supposed to take the shipment, but they pulled out. I heard they got a major job in the works. Something they didn't want to risk by drawing the attention of a Spectre with a weapons buy." Saren was intrigued. Whatever they were up to had to be big. The Blue Suns almost never turned their backs on a deal they'd already negotiated. If they were trying that hard to keep Spectres out of the picture, it meant he'd damn well better find out what was going on. "What else?" "That's all I know," the man said. "I swear. If you want more, you need to look at the Blue Suns." "So, do we have a deal?" Saren gave a derisive snort. "Deal?" "You know, I give you information about the Blue Suns and you let me live." The Spectre raised his pistol again. "You should have negotiated before you spilled your guts. You've got nothing left to bargain with." "What? No, please don't!" The pistol put an end to his protests, and Saren turned and walked calmly back outside, leaving the carnage of the warehouse behind. He'd alert the local authorities once he got back to Fend, so they could retrieve the stolen weapons and clean up the mess. Saren's mind was already on his next job. Initially, he'd dismissed the news of Sidon's destruction. He figured it would eventually lead back to some radical splinter group of Batarian rebels, a retaliation against humanity's efforts to push their main rivals out of the Verge. But if the attack wasn't the work of political terrorists, then the Blue Suns were one of the few private security organizations with the capability to pull it off. Saren had every intention of finding out who had hired them and why, and he knew just where to start his investigation. Anderson had spent the better part of 2 days reviewing Kali Sanders' personnel file, trying to make sense of it. The physical data was straightforward. Age 26, height 5 feet 5 inches, weight 120 pounds. The ID picture in her file showed she had predominantly Caucasian features, complexion fair, eyes light brown, hair dark blonde. She was attractive, but Anderson doubted anyone would ever have called her cute. There was a hard edge to her expression, as if she were looking for a fight. That wasn't surprising, given her personal background. According to the file, she had grown up in the Texan megapolis formed by the union of Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio, one of the poorer regions on Earth. She was raised by a single mother, a factory worker making minimum wage. Enlisting with the Alliance had probably been her only chance to get a better life, though she hadn't signed up until the age of 22, shortly after her mother's death. Most recruits signed up before they were 20. Anderson had joined the day he turned 18. But despite her late start, or maybe because of it, Kali Sanders had excelled at basic training. She was competent in hand-to-hand combat and weapons training, but her true aptitude had been in the technology fields. According to her file, she'd taken entry-level computing courses in the years leading up to her enlistment, and once she joined, she threw herself into the study of advanced programming, data communication networks, and prototype systems architectures. She finished at the top of her class, completing a 3-year program in only 2. Personality tests and psych evaluations showed she was intelligent, with a strong sense of personal identity and self-worth. Evaluations from peers and superior officers showed she was cooperative, popular, and an asset to any team she worked with. It was no wonder she'd been assigned to the Sidon project. And that's why none of this felt right. Anderson knew the difference between a good soldier and a bad one. Kali Sanders was definitely a good soldier. She may have initially joined the Alliance as an escape, seeking a better life than the one she had on Earth, but she had found exactly what she was looking for. She'd experienced nothing but success, accolades, and rewards since joining the military. Plus, with her mother gone, she had no other family and no real friends outside her fellow soldiers. Anderson couldn't come up with a single reason she would turn against the Alliance. Even greed didn't make sense. Everyone at Sidon was pulling down a top salary. Besides, Anderson knew enough about human nature to understand that it took more than simple greed to convince a person to aid in the slaughter of the people they lived and worked with every day. One more thing bothered him about this. If Sanders was the traitor, why had she disappeared the day before the attack and drawn attention to herself? All she had to do was show up for her regular shift, and it would have been assumed that she was one of the bodies vaporized in the explosion. It felt like someone was setting her up. But he couldn't deny that her sudden disappearance was too suspicious to be dismissed as mere coincidence. He needed to figure out what was going on, and so far his only possible clue was what wasn't in her file. Kali Sanders' father was officially listed as unknown. In this day and age of universal birth control to deal with rising populations, as well as massive DNA databanks, it was virtually impossible not to know the identity of a child's parents, unless it was being specifically hidden. Digging deeper into official files had shown all references to Kali Sanders' father had been purged. Hospital records, immunization reports, everything. It was as if someone had actively tried to cut him out of her life, someone with enough importance to falsify government documents. Kali and her mother both had to be part of the cover-up. If her mother had wanted the father's identity exposed, There would have been no way to stop her, and Kali could easily have gotten a DNA test any time she wanted. They had to know, but for some reason they didn't want anyone else knowing. However, neither one of them had the kind of financial resources or political clout it would take to pull something like that off, which meant someone else, probably the father, had also been involved. If Anderson could figure out who the father was, and why he'd been expunged from all official records, it might help him figure out how Kali Sanders was tied up in the attack on Sidon. Unfortunately, he'd exhausted all official channels. Fortunately, there were other ways to dig up buried secrets, which was why he was now standing in a dark alley in the wards, waiting to meet with an information broker. He had shown up a few minutes early, eager to see what the broker's search would turn up. Not surprisingly, his contact wasn't here yet. He spent the next few minutes waiting, occasionally pacing back and forth as the seconds dragged by. A figure stepped into view just as his watch beeped on the hour, materializing from the shadows. As she approached, it quickly became clear that she was a Solarian. Shorter and thinner than humans, Solarians resembled a cross between some kind of lizard or chameleon and the Greys, described by alleged victims during the rash of fictitious alien abductions reported back on Earth in the late 20th century. Anderson wondered if she'd been there the whole time, observing him as she waited patiently for the moment of their appointed meeting to arrive. "Did you find anything?" he asked the woman he had hired to scour the extranet for any clues as to the identity of Kali Sanders' father. Trillions of tetragigs of data were transmitted in bursts across the extranet every day. There had to be something useful buried in there. But searching a functionally infinite amount of data for a specific piece of information could be an exercise in pointless frustration. It would take days to collect, process, and scan every burst. And even then the output might be millions and millions of pages of hard copy. That's where information brokers came in. Specialists who used complex algorithms and custom-designed search engines to limit and sort the data. Mastering the extranet was as much an art as a science, and Solarians excelled at the art of gathering confidential information. The Solarian blinked her large eyes. "I warned you there might not be much to find," she said, speaking quickly. Solarians always spoke quickly. "Records from before your species linked to the extranet are sporadic." Anderson had expected as much. Archives from the days predating the First Contact War were slowly being added to the extranet by various government agencies, but the input of old records was a minor priority for every administration. Given Sanders's age, it was likely her father disappeared from her life long before humanity ever came into contact with the greater galactic community. "So you've got nothing?" The Solarian smiled. "That's not what I said. It was difficult to track down, but there was something. It seems the left hand of the Alliance is unaware of what the right is doing." She handed him a small optical storage disk. "Make my life easier," Anderson said, taking it from her and stuffing it into his pocket. "Just tell me what I'm going to find when I scan this thing." "The day Kali Sanders graduated from your military training academy at Arcturus, an encrypted message was forwarded through classified Alliance channels to an individual on one of your colonies in the Skyllian Verge. It was subsequently purged seconds after it was received." "How'd you get access to classified Alliance channels?" Anderson demanded. The Solarian laughed. "Your species has been transmitting data across the extranet for less than a decade. My species has been directing the primary espionage and intelligence operations for the Citadel Council for 2,000 years. "Point taken. You said the message was purged?" "True. Deleted and scrubbed from the records. But nothing is ever truly gone once it hits the extranet. There are always echoes and remnants for people like me to track down. The extranet works on a—" "I don't need the details," Anderson interrupted, holding up a hand to cut her off. "What did the message say?" "It was brief. A single text file comprised of Kali Sanders' name, final grades, and her class standing. Very impressive. She could have a bright future in my field if she wanted to come work for—" Anderson cut her off again, growing impatient. "This was all in her personnel file. I didn't pay you to get me her marks." "You didn't pay me at all," she pointed out. "This is being billed directly to your superiors at the Alliance, remember? I doubt you could afford to hire me. That's why you came to me in the first place." Anderson's hands involuntarily went up and rubbed his temples. "Right. That's not what I meant." Solarians tended to talk in circles, changing topics with every breath. It gave him a headache, and it always seemed to take twice as long as it should to get what you needed out of them. "I hope to God you have something more than this." "The sender of the message was one of the instructors at the Academy, a man long since retired. Preliminary follow-up indicates he is not germane to the investigation. He was likely only acting on orders of the recipient, and likely knew nothing about why the information was being sent. Though I have no proof, I suspect the recipient is Collie Sanders's father. As a high-ranking Alliance officer, he would have had the means to systematically cover up their relationship, and do so in a way that would make it difficult to track. However, I was not able to determine why the father and daughter chose to alienate themselves from each—" "Please," he begged, cutting her off one more time. "All I want is a name. Don't say anything else. Just tell me who received the message and where I can find him." She blinked again, and from the change in her expression, Anderson thought he might have hurt her feelings. Mercifully, though, she did as he had asked. "The message was sent to Rear Admiral John Grissom. He's on Elysium."
Chapter 10. "This is a private club, Batarian," growled the Krogan security guard who stepped in Grotto Iba's way as he tried to enter the doors of the sanctuary.
"Tonight I'm a member,"
the Batarian mercenary replied, holding up his financial access card to the scanner and letting it deduct the 400 credit cover charge directly from his bank account. The Krogan didn't move, barring his way until the transaction was approved. He only took his eyes off Grotto for an instant, to glance at the name and ID picture that flashed up on the screen. He was checking to see if the access card had been stolen, but the ID image was clearly that of the Batarian standing before him. There was no mistaking the blue sun tattoo emblazoned on his forehead, just above his left inner eye. It was clear from the Krogan's expression he still didn't want to move aside and let Grotto in.
"The cover charge only grants entrance to the club," he noted. "Any services will be an additional fee, a significantly additional fee."
"I know how it works," Grotto spat back. "I have money."
The Krogan considered for a moment, hoping to find some other way to keep him out.
"There are no weapons permitted inside the club."
"I said I know how it works,"
Grotto snarled. Still the guard hesitated. The Batarian spread his arms out wide and held them in place.
"Just search me and get it over with."
The Krogan stepped back, beaten.
"That won't be necessary."
He tilted his head to the left, a Batarian sign of respect.
"My apologies, Mr. Iba. Helanda at the counter in the back can attend to your needs."
Grotto lowered his arms, a little surprised. It was amazing the kind of respect money could buy. If he had actually thought it was possible to get in without being searched, he would have smuggled a pistol in under his belt, or at least slipped a knife in his boot. Instead, he slowly tilted his head to the right in acknowledgment of the apology, playing the part of a man whose honor had been insulted. He boldly walked past the doorman and into the most exclusive whorehouse on Kamala, trying to appear calm, though his heart was racing. Part of him had been afraid they would simply turn him away even if he paid the cover charge. It was obvious he didn't belong here. The sanctuary was reserved for the rich and elite, those with fortunes, not soldiers of fortune. For the most part, the cover fee kept men like Grotto out. There were plenty of other places on Kamala to buy companionship for the night, none of them nearly as expensive as the sanctuary. But the Blue Sun's new employer had paid a substantial fee for their exclusive services over the next few months, including a large bonus after the attack on the Sidon military base. Grotto hadn't been directly involved in the attack, and he hadn't been in the warehouse when their employer had met up with Scar. If he had, he'd know who was paying them, but he might also have been one of the unlucky mercs who ended up dead at Scar's hands. The Blue Suns paid every member an equal share anyway, so Grotto hadn't missed out on anything but the chance of getting killed. And the mercs who'd been at the warehouse were still on the job. They'd been contracted as personal bodyguards for the anonymous money man. Grotto, on the other hand, was free to go out and enjoy his share of the credits. And for once in his life he was going to experience a pleasure reserved for those far more wealthy and powerful than he. He'd spent part of the bonus on new clothes, but even so he began to feel self-conscious as he crossed the room. He didn't fit in, and the clientele, most of them Batarians, were regarding him with open suspicion and curiosity. Societal caste was an important part of Batarian culture, and Grotto was openly defying the conventional norms. But when he noticed that even the employees were looking at him with contempt, his embarrassment transformed into self-righteous rage. Who were they to look down on him? Nothing but servants and whores. As he marched up to the counter in the back, passing several more Krogan security personnel, he vowed he'd make somebody pay. Once he had his whore in a private room, he'd turn her scorn into fear and terror. "Welcome to the sanctuary, Mr. Iba," cooed the young Batarian woman behind the counter. "My name is Helanda. I apologize for the incident at the door," she continued. "Odak sometimes takes his job too seriously. You have my personal assurance he will be properly respectful next time." "Good. I expect better treatment in a place like this." There wasn't going to be a next time, but Grotto wasn't going to tell her that. "We have a wide variety of services available," Helanda explained, smoothly glossing over the doorman's indiscretion and moving on to the business at hand. "The sanctuary aims to satisfy the desires of all our clientele, no matter how esoteric. If you tell me what you are interested in, I will personally help you select an appropriate consort, or consorts, for the evening." "I'm interested in you," he said, leaning forward on the counter, responding to the unspoken invitation. "That is not my role here," she said curtly, taking a half-step back, the lids of her inner eyes flicking quickly in distaste. He realized her charm was nothing but an act, a game she was playing with him. Her involuntary reaction exposed the truth. She felt the same revulsion he'd seen in the other employees. From the corner of his eyes, Grotto noticed one of the Krogan guards casually moving closer to them, and he decided now was not the time for retribution. He forced a laugh, as if he found her stinging rejection amusing. "Actually, I'm interested in a human female." "A human female?" Helanda asked, as if she wasn't sure she had heard him properly. "I'm curious," he replied coldly. "Very well, Mr. Iba," she said, touching a button behind the counter that brought up a small screen in front of her. "I should advise you that there is a premium charged for all interspecies requests. The appropriate fees are listed beside each consort." She spun the screen to face him. The display showed several prospects, along with the allotted price for each. Grotto had to check himself to keep from choking in shock when he saw the amounts. Unlike the whorehouses he usually frequented, hourly rates weren't an option here. A full night at the sanctuary was going to cost several hundred credits more than his entire bonus. For a brief second he considered turning around and just walking out. But if he did, the 400 credits he'd paid at the door were gone for good. "Her," he said, pointing at one of the pictures. There were less expensive options, but he was damned if he was going to let them bully him with their prices. He was never coming back here, so he was determined to get exactly what he wanted. Truthfully, he didn't know all that much about humans. But something about this individual appealed to him. She seemed fragile, vulnerable. "An excellent choice, Mr. Iba. I will have someone escort you to your room for the evening. Your consort will be up shortly." A few minutes later, Grotto was alone in one of the soundproofed private rooms, pacing back and forth and slamming his fist into his hand. He was thinking back on all the humiliations he'd suffered since arriving at this place, working himself up into a fever, determined to take it out on the unfortunate human girl who was about to become his victim for the evening. He wasn't physically attracted to humans, female or otherwise, but this night wasn't going to be about sex. Grotto simply didn't like humans. They bred and spread like vermin, swarming out across the verge, gobbling up colony worlds and forcing other species out, like the Batarians. The humans he worked with in the Blue Suns knew how to handle themselves in a fight, but like all of their kind, they were arrogant and self-important. Tonight, he would take one of that proud species and make her suffer. He would humiliate, degrade, and punish her. He would break her. There was a knock, soft and timid. He pulled open the door, reaching out to grab the woman's wrist and yank her into the room. But he froze when he saw a male Turian standing there. "Who are—" The words were cut off as the Turian punched him hard in the throat. Choking and gagging, Grotto staggered back and fell onto the bed in the center of the room. The Turian calmly stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Grotto heard the lock click into place, sealing the pair of them in together. Somehow, scrambling to his feet, Grotto struggled to catch his breath as he brought his fists up, waiting for the Turian to move in and try to finish him off. After locking the door, however, the Turian just stood there.
"Who are you?"
Grotto finally gasped. "Saren," was the one-word reply. Grotto shook his head. He didn't recognize the name.
"How'd you get past the guards?"
he demanded.
"They didn't try to stop me,"
Saren replied, his voice relaxed.
"I think they actually wanted me to come in here and take care of you."
"What? What do you mean?"
Grotto's voice was shaky. The unnatural calm of the Turian was unsettling. He kept his hands up, poised in case the intruder made a move.
"Are you really that stupid? Don't you realize they knew exactly what you had planned for tonight? They knew what you were after the moment you asked for a human consort."
What are you talking about?"
The Turian took a single step forward. Grotto scuttled 2 steps back, his fists raised and ready. He would have retreated further, but he had reached the wall on the far end of the room. There was nowhere left to go.
"The sanctuary does not allow its consorts to be harmed or injured,"
Saren explained calmly. As he spoke, he began to slowly advance, one deliberate step at a time.
"They were monitoring the room."
Step.
"The moment you laid a hand on that woman, an angry Krogan would have burst in and ripped your head off."
Step.
I didn't even do anything,"
The Batarian protested, finally dropping his fists. He felt like a fool waving them around when the other man seemed so calm. Step.
"I convinced them to let me handle it instead,"
Saren continued, ignoring him.
"They were concerned about bothering the other guests."
Step.
"Then I reminded them that the walls are completely soundproof."
Step.
"And you've already paid for the room."
Step. The Turian was directly in front of him now, though he still appeared completely relaxed. Grotto brought his fists up again.
"Back up or I'll—"
He never had a chance to finish the sentence as Saren delivered a solid kick to his nether regions. Blinding bolts of furious pain shot up through Grotto's bowels and stomach. He collapsed to the ground, the agony so great he could only whimper. Saren grabbed him by the material of his newly purchased suit and yanked him back to his feet, then jabbed his thumb into one of Grotto's inner eyes, rupturing the orb and blinding him with a single blow. The Batarian fainted, lapsing into unconsciousness from the sudden shock and pain. Seconds later he woke up screaming as Saren broke his right elbow. Howling in agony, he curled up into a ball, rolling back and forth as his body experienced physical suffering beyond anything he had ever imagined.
"You disgust me,"
Saren whispered, kneeling down to grab Grotto's left wrist. He extended the Batarian's good arm, locking out the joints, and began to apply pressure.
"You wanted to torture an innocent victim for your own pleasure, you sick bastard. Torture is only useful if it has a purpose," Saren added,
though his words were drowned out by the crack of Grotto's left elbow and the subsequent shrieks. Saren stepped back from the convulsing man, letting the waves of pain rack his body. It took nearly a minute for shock to set in, numbing his mangled limbs to the point where Grotto could finally speak. "You'll pay for this!" Grotto wailed up at him from the ground, sobbing freely. Tears and mucus mixed with ocular fluid from his blind eye, dribbling down into his mouth and slurring his words into a blubbery parody of a threat. "Do you know who I am? I'm with the Blue Suns!" "Why do you think I followed you here?" A look of horror spread across Grotto's face as he finally understood. "You're a specter," he mumbled. "Please," he begged, "tell me what you want. Anything, I'll give it to you." "Information," Saren replied. "Tell me what you know about Sidon." "We were hired to take out the base," the crippled man admitted. "By who?" "I don't know. I only dealt with a go-between. I never saw him, never heard a name." Saren sighed and knelt down at the floor beside Grotto. There were many exotic methods of interrogation, a million ways to inflict pain and punishment on a victim. But Turians were practical people, and he personally preferred the brutal effectiveness of simple, basic techniques. Grabbing the man's dangling left arm by the wrist, he took a firm grip on one of his fingers and began to bend it backwards. "No!" the Batarian screamed. "No, please! It's the truth! That's all I know! You have to believe me!" He stuck to the story, even after 3 of the fingers on his hand were broken at the middle knuckle, convincing Saren he was telling the truth. "How did you get inside the base?" Saren asked, changing his line of questioning. "The man who hired us," Grotto muttered, his voice raw and raspy from the fresh round of screaming that had torn up his throat. "He had someone on the inside." "Give me a name." "Please!" he begged in a high-pitched, mewling whine. "I don't know. I wasn't even there." Saren grabbed another finger, and the words began to pour out. "Wait! I don't know the inside man, but I can tell you other stuff. After the attack, we brought in an outsider, a freelance bounty hunter, a big Krogan named Scar." "Good," Saren said, releasing his hold on the uninjured digit. "Keep going." "Something went wrong at Sidon. Someone survived the attack, a loose end. Scar was hired to hunt her down. A human. She's on Elysium. I don't know her name." "What else? Why were you hired to attack the base?" "I don't know," Grotto whispered fearfully. "We weren't given any details. The money man was afraid someone would talk. He didn't want the specters to find out." Saren broke 2 more of his fingers just to be sure. "Please," the Batarian sobbed once he'd stopped screaming. "It's not me you want. There was a meeting at the warehouse with Scar and the man who hired us. Talk to someone who was there." The Turian wasn't surprised his victim was offering up someone else. It was a common reaction in most subjects. Typically, it was a sign the interrogation was nearing an end. Once the subject realized they were running out of useful information to surrender, betraying their allies became their only chance of avoiding further torture. "Where can I find someone from the warehouse?" the Spectre demanded. I don't know," Grotto admitted, his voice trembling. "They're with the money man. He hired them on as his personal bodyguards." "Guess I'm stuck with you, then," Saren replied. "That's all I know," the Batarian protested weakly, his voice completely devoid of guile, subterfuge, or hope. "Even if you break every bone in my body, I can't tell you anything else." "We'll see," Saren promised. It was a long night for Saren. The Batarian went into shock and passed out 3 more times during the interrogation. Each time it happened, Saren would have to sit down and wait for him to regain consciousness. There was no point in torturing an unresponsive subject. In the end, it turned out Grotto had been telling the truth. Saren didn't get anything more out of him. He'd suspected as much, but he had needed to be absolutely sure. There was too much at stake. Someone had hired the Blue Suns. Someone with enough wealth and power to secure their exclusive loyalty. Someone who had taken extra precautions to make sure the Spectres wouldn't find out what was going on. Saren needed to know who had ordered the attack on Sidon and why. Billions of lives could be at stake, and he was more than willing to torture a single merc for hours on end if there was even the smallest chance he could learn something that might help him break the case. Not that there weren't consequences to his actions. The soundproof room had amplified the piercing shrieks and keening wails of his victim. The screams had physically hurt Saren's ears, and now he had a pounding headache. Next time, he thought as he rubbed his temples, I'll bring earplugs. He had lifted the Batarian up onto the bed part way through the interrogation. It was easier to work on him there than to constantly bend down to reach him on the floor. Now Grotto was just lying motionless on his back, breathing softly in a deep sleep brought on by utter mental and physical exhaustion. There wasn't much to go on, but Saren had a solid lead to follow. He knew Scar by reputation, and he knew the bounty hunter was headed to Elysium. It shouldn't be hard to pick up his trail there. First, though, he had to clean up this mess. Arresting Grotto wasn't an option. It would draw attention and alert whoever had hired the Blue Suns that a Spectre was on the case. It was easier, and safer, to just dispose of the body. Saren gently placed a hand on either side of the Batarian's head, then gave a savage twist at an awkward angle, breaking his elongated neck. A quick and painless death. After all, he wasn't a monster. Chapter 11. Anderson disembarked on Elysium with the 300 other passengers who had booked a seat on the public transport shuttle from the Citadel. The landing port teemed with people. The densely packed crowd was a mix of every known species in the galaxy, some arriving, some leaving, most waiting in the long winding lines to clear customs and border stations. Security had always been tight on Elysium, but with the attack on the nearby Sidon base, things had been elevated to a level Anderson had never seen before. Not that he disapproved. Ideally located near the nexus of several primary and secondary relays, Elysium was a major hub for travel and commerce that the Alliance could not afford to expose to possible terrorist attacks. The colony was only 5 years old, but already it was one of the busiest trade ports in the Verge. The population had exploded, recently passing 1 million, if you included all the various and varied resident aliens who accounted for nearly half the total inhabitants. Unfortunately, that also meant a disproportionately high number of visitors to Elysium were non-human and subject to heightened screening procedures. The extra security made arrivals and departures a long and cumbersome experience for most travelers. Even humans were subjected to major delays. The staff taken away to help process the alien visitors meant fewer people left behind to deal with the Alliance citizens. Fortunately for Anderson, his military ID gave him the luxury of bypassing the long lines. The guard at the Alliance station scanned his thumbprint and studied his identification for a few seconds before saluting and waving him through. Officially, Anderson wasn't here in any authorized capacity. He was just an Alliance Marine taking a shore leave, a believable enough cover story to avoid drawing any unwanted attention and hide the true purpose of his visit. John Grissom was Collie Sanders' father. It was pretty obvious they were estranged, but there was still a good chance Grissom knew something that could help Anderson's investigation. Sidon was only a few hours away from Elysium. There were records of Sanders booking a passage here when she went UA. And even though it looked like Grissom hadn't communicated with his daughter in at least 10 years, it was public knowledge that the Alliance's most recognizable soldier had taken early retirement and become a recluse on humanity's largest colony in the Verge. Anderson still couldn't wrap his head around the idea that Sanders was a traitor. The pieces just didn't add up. But he knew she was involved somehow. Her sudden disappearance had to be more than coincidence. Maybe she had gotten in over her head and panicked when things got out of control. He could imagine her arriving on Elysium, scared, alone, not knowing who to trust. Estranged or not, her father was the most likely person she'd turn to for help. After checking his gear at the hotel, Anderson rented a car and drove out to the isolated estates on the outskirts of the city. It took him a while to find Grissom's house. The addresses in the area were so inconspicuous as to be almost hidden. It was obvious the people who lived out here valued their privacy. Exiting the vehicle, he began the long walk across the grounds of the estate toward the surprisingly small domicile, located as far back from the road as possible. Anderson didn't understand Grissom's desire to withdraw from the public eye. He respected the man and his reputation, but he couldn't imagine any way to justify simply walking away like he did. A soldier didn't turn his back on the Alliance like that. "You're not here to pass judgment," he reminded himself as he reached the door. He rang the bell and waited, involuntarily standing at attention. "You're just here to find Collie Sanders." It took several minutes before he heard someone coming on the other side, grumbling as he approached. A moment later the door opened, revealing Rear Admiral John Grissom in all his glory. The salute Anderson had been on the verge of snapping off by way of greeting died at his hip. The man before him wore nothing but a tattered housecoat and dirty boxers. His hair was long and uncombed, and his face was partially hidden behind a 3-day stubble of gray and black hairs. His eyes were hard and bitter, and his face seemed frozen in a scowl. "What do you want?" he demanded. "Sir," Anderson replied, "my name is Lieutenant Commander David Grissom cut him off. "I know who you are. We met back at Arcturus." "That's right, sir," Anderson acknowledged, feeling a faint surge of pride at being recognized. "Before the First Contact War. I'm surprised you remember me." "I'm retired, not senile." Despite the joke, there was nothing humorous in Grissom's tone. There was an awkward pause as Anderson tried to reconcile his memories of the iconic figure of Grissom's past with the disheveled grouch now standing in front of him. It was Grissom who filled the silence. "Look, kid, I'm retired. So go back and tell the brass that I'm not going to do any interviews or speeches or appearances just because one of our military bases got attacked. I'm done with that crap." Anderson pounced, convinced the other man had already slipped up. "How do you know Sidon was attacked?" Grissom glared at him like he was a fool. "It's all over the damn news vids." "That's not why I'm here," Anderson said, trying to hide his embarrassment. "Can we talk inside?" "No." "Please, sir, it's a matter I'd rather not discuss out here in public." Grissom held his ground, blocking the door so Anderson couldn't enter. The lieutenant realized tact and diplomacy weren't going to be any use here. Time to be blunt. "Tell me about Collie Sanders, sir." "Who?" The old man was good. Anderson had been hoping to see some reaction at the name of his long-lost daughter, his only flesh and blood, but Grissom hadn't even flinched. "Collie Sanders," Anderson repeated, his voice becoming noticeably louder. It was unlikely anyone would hear him. The neighbors were too far away, but he had to do something to get inside that door. "Your daughter, the soldier who went UA from Sidon mere hours before it was attacked. The woman we're looking at is a traitor to the Alliance." Grissom's scowl became a grimace of pure hatred. "Shut up and get your ass in here," he muttered, stepping aside. Once inside, Anderson followed his reluctant host into the small living room. Grissom settled into one of the 3 padded chairs, but the lieutenant remained standing, waiting for an invitation to do the same. After several seconds, he realized the invitation wasn't forthcoming, and he took a seat on his own. "How'd you find out about Collie?" Grissom finally asked, speaking as casually as if they were discussing the weather. "There are no secrets in this day and age," Anderson replied. "We know she was last seen here on Elysium. I need to know if she came to talk to you." "I haven't spoken to my daughter since before she was a teenager," Grissom replied. "Her mother didn't think much of me as a husband or a father, and I couldn't really argue with her. I figured the best thing was to just get out of their lives." "Hey," Grissom suddenly recalled. "Last time we met, you said you were engaged. A girl waiting for you back on Earth, right?"
You must be married by now. Congratulations."
He was trying to throw Anderson off balance. Grissom knew damn well how hard it was for an Alliance soldier to make a marriage work. His innocent question was meant to rattle his guest. He may have looked like a harmless, burned-out old man, but there was still plenty of fight left in him. Anderson wasn't about to rise to the bait. "Sir, I need your help. Your daughter is suspected of being a traitor to the Alliance. Doesn't that mean anything to you?"
"Why should it?" he shot back. "I barely know her."
"I found out you two were related. Eventually somebody else is going to make that connection too."
"What? You think I'm worried about my reputation?" he scoffed. "Do you think I'm going to help you because I don't want people to know the great Admiral Grissom had an illegitimate daughter who's accused of treason? Ha! You're the ones who care about crap like that. I really couldn't give a damn."
"That's not what I meant, sir," Anderson replied, refusing to be provoked. "I tracked Kali here, to you. That means someone else can track her here, too. I came to you because I want to help your daughter, but the next person who comes after her, and we both know there will be others, might be looking to harm her." Grissom leaned forward slowly and placed his head in his hands, considering Anderson's words. Several long moments went by before he sat up straight again. His eyes were moist with tears.
"She's not a traitor," he whispered. "She didn't have anything to do with this."
"I believe you, sir," Anderson said, his voice sincere and sympathetic. "But not many others will. That's why I need to find her before something happens to her." Grissom didn't say anything, but simply sat there, chewing on his lower lip. "I won't let anything bad happen to her," Anderson reassured him. "I give you my word on it."
"She came here,"
Grissom finally admitted, taking a deep breath.
"She said she was in trouble, something to do with Sidon. I didn't ask her any of the details. I guess I was afraid of what she might tell me."
He leaned forward and clasped his head in his hands again.
"I was never there for her when she was growing up," he mumbled, sounding as if he was on the verge of tears. "I couldn't turn her away now. I owe her."
"I understand, Admiral," Anderson said, reaching forward to place a comforting hand on Grissom's shoulder. "But you have to tell me where she went." Grissom looked up at him, his expression naked and vulnerable.
"I gave her the name of a freighter captain down at the ports. Ehring, captain of the Gossamer. He helps people who want to disappear. She left last night."
"Where was she going?"
"I didn't ask. Ehring takes care of all the details. You need to talk to him."
"Where's he?"
"The Gossamer left this morning on a trade run out near the Terminus systems. He won't be back for weeks."
"We don't have weeks, sir." Grissom stood up, his posture a little straighter than it had been when Anderson first arrived, as if his muscles were trying to remember what it was like to stand proudly at attention.
"Then I guess you'll just have to get your patrols out there and find him, soldier. He's the only one who can lead you to my daughter."
Anderson jumped crisply to his feet. "Don't worry, Admiral. I won't let anything happen to her." He started to salute, but Grissom turned his head away.
"Don't," he muttered, ashamed. "I don't deserve that. Not anymore."
Anderson extended his hand instead. The older man hesitated a moment, then reached out and clasped it in a surprisingly firm grip.
"You're a better man than I ever was, Anderson. The Alliance is lucky to have you."
The lieutenant didn't know what to say, so he only nodded. Grissom took him firmly by the elbow and led him out of the living room to the front door.
"Remember your promise," he said as his parting words. "Don't let anything happen to my daughter."
Grissom watched the lieutenant leaving his home on the vid-screen for the security camera over his door, only turning away when the young man got into his vehicle and sped off. Then he made his way slowly to the back of the house and knocked once on the closed door of his bedroom. A second later, Kali opened it and asked, "Who was it?"
"Some Alliance snoop who figured out we were related. I sent him on a wild goose chase. He'll spend the next 2 weeks out near the Terminus systems chasing down an old friend of mine."
"Are you sure he bought it?" Kali asked.
"I gave him exactly what he wanted," Grissom said with a cynical smile. The chance to help an old broken-down hero remember something of who he used to be. But he's not the one we have to worry about, Grissom continued. Things won't get tough until we run into someone involved in the attack on Sidon.
Kali reached out and grabbed his hand, pressing it firmly between her own palms.
"Thank you,"
she said, staring up into her father's eyes.
"I mean it."
He nodded and shifted uncomfortably until she released her grip.
We'll wait a few more days, he said, turning away and leaving her to the privacy of her room. Then we'll figure out some way to get you off this planet.
A large dark shadow crept quickly and quietly across the moonlit grounds of Grissom's estate, making its way toward the home. Scar could move silently when he had to, even in full body armor. It slowed him down, but he usually relied on strength rather than speed anyway. There were no lights on inside the small house of the man Scar now knew to be the father of his target. He'd been surprised when his Batarian information broker had come up with the name of an Alliance hero, but it didn't really change the job. It just meant there'd be more fallout when he was done. The Krogan didn't know if Kali Sanders was inside, but even if she wasn't, her father probably knew how to find her. Scar was confident he could make the human talk, as long as he didn't accidentally kill him first. That's why he was traveling light, armed only with a pistol and his favorite knife. He paused outside the only door, listening for signs of life. From his belt he pulled out his Omnitool, using it to hack in and disable the security system and override the electronic lock. He slid the Omnitool back into his belt, exchanging it for his pistol, and pushed the door open. His eyes still adjusting to the darkness, he put one foot across the threshold. The shotgun blast took him square in the chest. There was a blue flash as the reflexive system of kinetic barrier fields reacted to the impact, deflecting most of the rounds harmlessly away. A few tore through the kinetic barriers, only to ricochet off the ablative plates of his body armor, or bury themselves into the thick padding underlay. A handful penetrated every layer of protection and tore into the flesh beneath. The force of the blast lifted the Krogan off his feet, knocking the pistol from his grip and hurling him back out the door to land heavily on the ground. Grissom jumped up from the chair where he'd been holding a nightly vigil ever since Kali had arrived and raised the gun for another shot. He'd recognized the blue flash as the intruder's kinetic barriers that absorbed most of the initial blow, but the point-blank hit would have drained the shields, and one more good shot should finish the job. Lying on his back, Scar yanked the knife from his belt and flung it end over end at his attacker. The blade sank deep into the muscle of Grissom's left bicep as he squeezed the shotgun's trigger again, knocking him back and throwing off his aim. Instead of blowing away the Krogan's head, he left a scorching hole in the ground just beside him. The shotgun's barrel slipped from Grissom's suddenly nerveless hand. Scar was on his feet and back inside the house before the old man could use his one good arm to bring the weapon to bear again. Bellowing in anger, the Krogan slapped the gun away with one massive fist, sending it skittering into the living room. He grabbed the human and flung him against the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. The blade slipped from Grissom's arm as he slumped down to the floor, all the air knocked out of his lungs. The alien loomed above him, turning its head slightly so it could fix one of its cold reptilian eyes on him. Grissom was no coward, but he felt fear grip his heart as he stared up into the dead black pupil. Then he heard a loud crack, 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 the familiar retort of an Alliance Hani Keter P-1525, and the Krogan staggered away. He'd been shot 3 times in the heavy hump of muscle and bone on his back, but he was still standing. Lieutenant Anderson stood in the doorway, pistol drawn. He came into the room, firing the pistol a half-dozen more times as the Krogan turned to face him. He aimed low, looking to take out the legs. One of his shots found the exposed joint at the knee where the hard plates of body armor were connected by a flexible but vulnerable padded mesh. Roaring in rage and agony, the Krogan crashed to the ground, clutching at his wounded joint. "One move and the next shot goes right between your eyes," Anderson warned, taking a bead on the bony ridge running along the top of the Krogan's skull. Grissom was impressed. It wasn't easy to take a human in full-body armor down with a pistol, never mind a Krogan. "I'm glad to see you here," he managed to gasp once the wind returned to his lungs. "You didn't honestly expect me to be fooled by that little performance you gave the other day," Anderson replied, never taking his eyes or his weapon off the Krogan in the corner. "I've been watching this place ever since I walked out your door." Grissom struggled to his feet, his left arm still dangling uselessly, his right pressed against his heavily bleeding wound. A moan of pain escaped his lips. "Your friend is hurt," the Krogan growled. Anderson wasn't distracted even for an instant. "He's tough. He'll live." The Krogan was bleeding from the shot to his knee. The armor on his chest was peppered with small holes, the padding beneath scorched and burned. Dark blood oozed from 3 of them. Anderson guessed at least one of the shots to the back had penetrated deep enough to do some damage as well. But he'd seen Krogans take a hell of a lot more punishment than this and keep coming. The alien on the ground was a wounded beast, angry, desperate, and unpredictable. He was panting, though whether from pain, exertion, or pure rage it was hard to say. His scarred, brutish face was a mask of intense concentration. His muscles were tensed as if he was gathering himself to make a move. But if he tried anything, Anderson would shoot him in the head from inside of 3 meters. Even a Krogan couldn't survive that. He heard a door open and footsteps come running down the hall. "Oh, God, you're hurt!" a woman screamed. Anderson wasn't stupid enough to turn his head, but for a split second his eyes glanced in the direction of her voice. That was all the time the Krogan needed. He lashed out with a fist, sending a shockwave of rolling energy rumbling across the room. Anderson had never been hit with a biotic attack before, and he hadn't expected one from a Krogan. In the split second it took him to realize what was happening, he'd been swept up in the vortex and thrown all the way into the living room, where he crashed to the ground. It felt like being in an artificial gravity chamber when somebody switched the polarity, an instantaneous, inescapable, and irresistible force. He couldn't recover in time to grab his pistol from where it had fallen, nor could he reach the shotgun laying only a few feet away. Somehow the Krogan, despite his injuries, was already back on his feet and nearly on top of him, swinging his fist with enough power to cave in Anderson's skull. He ducked and slipped to the side, avoiding the punch. The follow-through landed square on the living room table. It disintegrated into splinters at the impact. Everything had descended into chaos. Grissom was shouting at Collie to run. She was screaming at Anderson to grab one of the guns. The Krogan...
Yeah, I just realized I totally fucked up the loop for the arm movement, so... Oh, fuck, man. So I'm gonna have to redo, like, the last 2 sprites, but I'm very, very tired, so I think I'm gonna go off now. Anyway, see you tomorrow, guys. Have a good evening.